Hey everyone, I'm Majiin, and you're watching World Tour Weekly, your one-stop shop for all competitive Flesh and Blood news. Today we're going to talk about Aurora reaching Living Legend status, Warriors possibly making a return to the competitive scene, and a couple of tidbits that were dropped to us in the recent Dev Talk video. Starting with the most immediately impactful news, Aurora has officially reached Living Legend status and will be retired out of the classic constructed format. Luckily for our 0-for-4 gamers, they won't have to wait too long before busting out the Lightning Runeblade cards yet again. The devs told us in the Dev Talk video that we should expect to see Aurora back sooner rather than later, but we'll talk about that a little further on in the video. When we take a look at the rest of the Living Legend leaderboard, there are a couple heroes that are close to 1,000 points, but it doesn't look like they're moving particularly fast. For example, Dash Inventor Extraordinaire is only 51 points away from hitting Living Legend, but she's been moving forward at a crawl, and I don't expect to see her leave until after High Seas pumps a little bit more juice into the Mechanologist class. The only hero that might be in danger of rotating is New, as she's been winning a lot more ever since Enigma rotated. It's looking like she's quite likely to still be legal for US Nationals, although it's not certain how long she'll stay after that. Speaking of ProQuest wins, let's move on to this week's Metagame Minute. This week's ProQuest results aren't anything super surprising up top, with Aurora and Florian leading the pack. New, Arachne Marionette, and Arachne Slip Through the Cracks make up 25 of the total wins this last week, making Assassin the second most winningest class after Runeblade. Azalea grabbed 7 wins this weekend, which is honestly a little bit surprising to me since I didn't expect her to do very well into the blocking heavy assassin-centric meta we seem to be moving towards. Verdance is leading the Wizard class with 4 wins compared to Acilio and Kano's 1 apiece, although I do expect these numbers to change here in a second. With Aurora leaving, we're likely going to see decks moving a little bit more towards fair and value-centric style game plans. I expect we'll see a couple more things like mid-range Florian, Warriors, Assassin decks that are happy to block, and even Redline Draconic decks like Syndra and Fi. I have a sneaking suspicion that Verdance will do pretty well into this field, but honestly, the biggest winner of Aurora leaving has got to be Kano. Aurora was such a rough matchup for our Blazing Boy that the entire deck had to be changed to make it as volatile as possible, trading consistency for power in a bid to do enough damage to get over the top of her prevention before she killed you on turn 2. Right now the deck plays things like 9 copies of Overflow the Aetherwell, the full 9 copies of Open the Floodgates, and while they're undeniably powerful, they can lead to some back-breaking variance on the combo turns. If the format changes the way I think it will, we might see him move back towards things like Aether Spindle and Aether Flare. These cards can allow him to put pressure on decks on his own turn, as well as make your combo a little bit more consistent. If you're playing a ProQuest this coming week, I suggest you don't leave the Arcane Barrier at home. Battle Hardened Minneapolis happened this last weekend, and outside of Aurora and Florian being the most represented decks, the rest of the field was pretty surprising to me, especially 7 copies of Syndra coming in third, and 6 entire copies of Kassai, making her the 4th most represented deck in the entire field. Just a little bit further down is 5 copies of Fang, and then 3 copies of Dorinthia. This honestly might be the most representation the Warrior class has had since Heavy Hitters. The class tends to do pretty poorly against unfair strategies like Wizard or Illusionist, but does thrive in a more value-centric meta. Watching coverage this weekend, I was constantly impressed with how much damage these Warrior decks were able to put out, as well as just how powerful Valiant Dynamo was. That card alone can make certain matchups miserable for your opponent, allowing decks like Kassai to block a Mistblade or a Kunai Retribution for free every single turn. Going back to the meta breakdown, Arachne Slip Through the Cracks being the most popular assassin was rather surprising to me. Marionette and New have seen a large surge in ProQuest win rate lately, so I expected their play rate ratios to be reflective of that. Perhaps players felt more comfortable taking an aggressive stance instead of slugging it out deep into 4th cycle against a Florian. But that's enough baseless speculation for one segment. Let's move on to our weekend winners. As we talked about a little bit earlier, Battle Hardened Minneapolis took place this weekend, with the top 8 consisting of 2 copies of Florian, 1 Arachne Marionette, 1 Fang, 1 Kassai, 1 Prism, 1 Syndra, and 1 Aurora. Andrew Rothermel on Kassai took down the entire event, beating out Syndra in the finals, which I'm gonna admit was not what I expected. Andrew Rothermel winning another event isn't all that surprising, he's a very strong player, but I did not have Kassai in my top 3 decks to win the Battle Hardened. Let's take a quick look at his list. It seems to not change too much from Kassai decks of the past, with a couple of noticeable inclusions from the Hunted set like Sharpened Senses and Trot Along. The spiciest thing in this deck is probably the 8 copies of Draw Swords, or at least it would be if it wasn't for the 3 full copies of Seduce Secrets. I've seen this card played a little bit in Acilio for the instant speed combo draw card, but I definitely never expected it to be a 3 of in a Battle Hardened winning Kassai list. After playing cards that have effects that let you look at players' hands recently, I feel like I underestimated how powerful that can be, especially against decks like Assassins, where knowing exactly what they have up their sleeve can tell you exactly how much you need to or need to not respect an attack. This can turn the kind of nebulous value of seeing your opponent's hand into real explicit value when you block exactly however much you need to. With Seduce Secrets, the 8 copies of Draw Swords, and Kassai's gold making mechanic, it seems like this deck is built from the ground up to take advantage of swinging Centauri Sabers for free as much as possible. I'm pretty excited to see if Kassai becomes more of a meta mainstay, or if this was like a perfect storm of a weekend for her to do well. Sunday kicked off the ProQuest Plus, and the top 8 looked a little bit different, with 4 copies of Aurora, 1 new, 1 Azalea, 1 Arachne, and 1 Prism. Azalea and Prism met in the finals, but the Ranger reigned supreme, with Matthew Gump taking down the entire event. This win gave Azalea a couple more LL points, but I don't expect her to hit Living Legend anytime soon, at least until we get a couple of new cards from High Seas. Alright, with the Battle Hardened in the books, let's take a look at today's card of the week. Today's card of the week is Draw Swords. It's pretty unassuming looking on the surface, but it can block 3 and it has the words draw a card on it, which are my 3 favorite cards outside of Icelander is Back. It was honestly a toss-up between Seduce Secrets and Draw Swords for today's card of the week, but I'm not quite sold on Seduce just yet. I feel like Draw Swords probably ends up blocking more often than not, but it is absurdly good at allowing Kassai to convert larger hands. It replaces itself on cast and allows Kassai to swing her Centauri Sabers for free that turn. This can generate some insane value with all these 0-cost pumps that the deck is playing, especially with cards like Blood on her hands. I think big pop-off turns like drawing a card into Blood on her hands are going to be really important for the Warrior class moving forward. It seems like without them, you might not be able to race aggro decks super efficiently, and you might not be able to make it over the top of blocking decks. If you want to see just how powerful free Sabers can be in Kassai, I got you covered with this week's Razer Replay.
Yeah.
For a gold.
All right, what's the draw going to be off the top?
That is a
It's
Sharpened Senses. Sharpened Senses hitting the table, giving +1 to all weapon attacks this turn, and go again if they're big enough.
Essentially, double Blade Runner without costing any resources this turn.
For 2, but there's also just so much power in the hand with this Unsheathed and this Blade Flurry ready to go. This is up to 7 power. This Blood on her hands has been absolutely unbelievable. This turn is diabolical. +3 from the Unsheathed on top of Sharpened Senses, and the Saber's base power for 2 means a Saber for 8 and coming in.
Isn't the last swing? There's a Saber after this as well, at least.
For 3. Activating Brave Forge Bracers to push more damage. Next Saber swing for 5. 26 damage off of 4 cards. Is the power of Blood on her hands.
That was a lot of damage for only 4 cards, and it let Andrew Rothamel take the lead and eventually take down the tournament. Before we wrap up for the day, I want to talk a little bit about the meta and where I expect it to go now that Aurora is left but pre-High Seas. I also want to touch on a couple of things that were mentioned in the Dev Talk video. As far as the meta goes, it's no secret that Florian is now going to be the deck to beat. So how do you beat it? Well, if you're comfortable on Wizard, that's a great place to start. You do have to be at least a little knowledgeable on how to approach the matchups though, because otherwise Amethyst Tiara with 20+ rune chance is going to make things really difficult for you. Just make sure to pack your 3 copies of Scour, and remember that you might not actually have to combo him in order to kill him. I've been having a lot of success recently with Verdance into Florian by just looping Evergreen until I fatigue him. With Kano, you kinda do have to combo kill him, and that can be pretty tough with Amethyst Tiara. For people who are struggling in the matchup, I would recommend trying to send 2 Wildfires in one turn. One to force them to pop the Tiara, and the second one to cast in response to the Tiara. Luckily, the standard Kano game plan makes it basically impossible for Florian to get online in any reasonable amount of time, so he doesn't get to build up that many rune chants. You also still get to play Scours if you would like, to keep clearing them over and over and chipping in some extra damage. The other direction I see players going in to combat the Earth Runeblade is the Draconic aggro decks. Decks like Fi, Syndra, and possibly even Ira present a lot of damage that's really hard for them to block cleanly and keeps chipping in over the course of the game. I'll be the first to admit that I can't give advice for these heroes like I could for Wizard, but I don't know, swing with your daggers a lot. It seemed to work well in the Battle Hardened. I do expect Warrior to be on the rise after the recent Battle Hardened finish, so I would recommend coming prepared to deal with some Fangs and Kassais. Aurora leaving the format is going to cause quite the shakeup, and we're not entirely sure yet just how everything is going to end up. Late yesterday, Brian Gottlieb and James White posted another Dev Talk video, which are quickly becoming some of my favorite content in Flesh and Blood. If you haven't yet watched them, I cannot recommend it enough. You get a peek into the inner workings of the game, and every now and then they sprinkle a little bit of knowledge on you that you wouldn't have known otherwise. The main topic of this Dev Talk was, unsurprisingly, Aurora reaching Living Legend and the Living Legend system as a whole. Brian also mentions that they're looking to add more ban windows, as well as move one forward to around May 19th. He says we should expect some shakeups in the CC format as well as possibly other formats. I personally am pretty glad that if we're getting bans, they're getting moved up, because it would have been a nightmare to try to deal with bans on top of High Seas, on top of a new format, on top of Aurora leaving, all for US Nationals just a week later. Also mentioned was how the Living Legend system brings a lot of good to the game, even though it doesn't always quite work as intended. This is a sentiment that I wholeheartedly agree with, and they say that we can expect Living Legend to continue to evolve as the game moves forward. On the flip side, they don't seem quite so hot on the ELO system, and they mention how it'll be gone in 2026. I'm pretty glad to see this one go, as it's pretty frustrating to be incentivized not to play a tournament just so you might not lose a qualification. In the video, we're also told to expect Aurora to come back sometime around May to June 2026. This would make it a pretty quick turnaround for a hero who hit Living Legend to make it back into Classic Constructed. I do think this is a pretty good move, considering how many players were sold on Flesh and Blood via the Aurora First Strike deck into Armory deck pipeline. We have another week of ProQuest to look forward to before a triple Battle Hardened weekend on the 16th. Players will be watching closely to see how the meta evolves as we move closer and closer to a High Seas release at the very end of the month. This has been World Tour Weekly. I'm Majiin. I'll see you next time.